The Iranian point of view is that Hamas is the liberation fighters fighting for the liberation of the Palestinian territory, so they continue to support them. This is what the Iranians are saying. They also support the Houthis in Yemen. We know what happened in Afghanistan, right? The Americans went to Afghanistan in 2001, October, and then they toppled the Taliban government. They stayed in Afghanistan for 20 years, and then after 20 years, they left Afghanistan, leaving the same Afghanistan in the hands of the Taliban. That's why the Obama administration back in 2013 started direct negotiations with the Iranians, and they reached an agreement in 2015. And as part of that agreement, Iran agreed to curtail its nuclear program, open up its nuclear facilities for the IAEA inspection. So, but at the same time, because of its geographical importance, everybody wanted to have a foothold in Iran. So when Iran became the Islamic Republic, from the Israeli point of view, as well as from the Arab point of view, there was a major shift in the way they looked at the region. So until then, they looked at each other as their main rivals. And the Arabs, particularly after the 1967 war, 1967 there was a war between the famous Six-Day War between the Arabs and the Israelis. And after the 1967 war, the Arabs started moving closer towards the Israelis. In 1978, 1979, Egypt became the first Arab country to have signed direct agreement, normalization agreement with Israel, right? And then Iran emerges as a new pillar. And because of its geographical heft, because of the size of the population, and because of its history, the power of its nationalism, the Israelis naturally looked at Iran as a major challenge, as a major threat. And what the Iranians did, immediately after Islamists came to power in Iran was the United States had imposed the sanctions on Iran, and the sanctions are still existing. Very tough, biting, crippling sanctions are still existing on Iran. And what the Iranians did, they started supporting different groups across the region. I mean, for example, the revolution happened in 1979. In the early 1980s, 1982, Hezbollah was created in Lebanon. In the context of an Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. So this is what the Iranians call their forward defense. They also call it their axis of resistance, which means they started supporting different militia groups, and they have their own calculus, they have their own logic to explain this policy. So they support Hezbollah, they support Hamas, because the Iranian point of view is that Hamas is the liberation fighters fighting for the liberation of the Palestinian territory, so they continue to support them. This is what the Iranians are saying. They also support the Houthis in Yemen, and they also support the Hashd al-Shabi in Iraq. So this is what the Iranians call their axis of resistance. So they support different militia groups, and these militia groups also, offer Iran some kind of depth, deterrence, strategic depth in this region, in an extremely hostile region. Because just look at West Asia and the countries, that surround Iran. In the Persian Gulf region, so which are the Persian Gulf region today? I mean, you have, of course, Iran, you have Iraq, and then Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates. And of all these Persian Gulf region, of Persian Gulf countries, there is only one country that doesn't host an American military base, and that's Iraq. Everybody else has American military base. And all countries except Oman have permanent American military bases. For example, the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar hosts some 10,000 American troops. And Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia is one of the largest air base facilities in the region. The air base in UAE hosts up to 5,000 to 10,000 American troops. So Iran is, in this region, Iran is practically surrounded by American bases. And I'll tell you how Iran used this weakness as an advantage during the war. So this is how Iran is placed in the region. And the Israelis always wanted to solve this Iran problem. They always wanted to solve this Iran problem. But they didn't want to go for a direct confrontation with Iran because of the obvious risks. Israel, I know many people, especially in Kerala, I talk to my own friends, they all think that Israel is the Sparta, it is the supreme power that is vanquishing and fighting against all of its enemies. But the Israelis know when it comes to actual problems, they know their own limitations. Of course, they have the support of the United States, but still, they operate in a very complicated, very complex theater. So they didn't want to go for a direct confrontation with the Iranians until recently, because they knew the regional equation was set against a direct Iran-Israel conflict. And the Americans, on the other side, they wanted to resolve the Iranian nuclear program. The Israelis wanted to get rid of the Iranian Islamic Republic itself. This is how, the Americans and Israelis looked at it. The Israelis actually wanted, they have always wanted regime change in Iran because they believe that only if they get a regime change in Iran, you bring down the Islamic Republic, and then you get a puppet regime in Tehran, only then you will be able to meet your strategic objectives. This is the Israeli perspective about the region. The Americans on the other side, they know that it's not going to be easy to get a regime change in Iran, especially after what they did in Iraq, especially after what they did in Afghanistan. We know what happened in Afghanistan, right? The Americans went to Afghanistan in 2001, October, and then they toppled the Taliban government. They stayed in Afghanistan for 20 years, and then after 20 years, they left Afghanistan, leaving the same Afghanistan in the hands of the Taliban. This is what they did. So, and in Iraq also, Iraq became a complete catastrophe. 1 million people were killed in Iraq after the American invasion of Iraq. The Americans thought that they were going to liberate Iraq. They thought they were going to liberate Libya. And Libya was one of the most stable countries in North Africa. And you look at Libya today, it was President Obama's home in Libya in 2011. Iraq was George Bush's home. Afghanistan was George Bush's home. So Iran, the Americans knew, was not going to be easy. So they wanted to tackle, especially Obama, wanted to tackle the nuclear program. Because, again, the same question comes to us many times. Israel is a nuclear power. Everybody knows. Israel made their bomb in the 1960s. The Iranians have a nuclear program. They have a very active nuclear program. They have multiple nuclear facilities. Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz. These three are their primary nuclear facilities. And they also have Bushehr, which is a Russian-built plant, and Arak, which is a heavy water plant. And the Iranians also have developed their own capacity to enrich uranium. And they have enriched uranium to up to 60% purity. So they have roughly 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. So, again, I'm not a physicist. I know there are a lot of, a lot of my audience who have a solid science background, so please pardon me if I make mistakes. So the 60% enriched uranium is technically only a step away from the weapon grade level, which is 90+% uranium. So Iranians, practically, they are a nuclear threshold state. So if they want to make the bomb, they can make the bomb within days. So Iran has a solid nuclear program. So the United States and the Israelis and several other countries were opposed to Iran's nuclear program. And from the Israeli point of view, what happens if Iran makes a bomb? I know that, nuclear bombs are not a solution to anything. But in a very perilous world we are living in, very chaotic world we are living in, countries use nuclear bomb as a means of deterrence against greater powers. So if Iran makes a bomb, Israel's monopoly in the region as the sole nuclear power will be broken. Israel is currently the only nuclear power. And if Iran makes the bomb, if the nuclear monopoly is broken, the balance of power in West Asia will be shifted. And if the balance of power in West Asia is shifted, Israel will not have the freedom which it currently has to operate in its neighborhood. It can bomb any country it wants to bomb, right? It's bombing Gaza, it's bombing Lebanon, it's bombing Syria, it had bombed Iran. So you look at this level of freedom no other country has, I think. The Russians are bombing Ukraine, but Russia is facing terrible sanctions from the West. Nobody wants to impose any sanctions on the Israelis. So Israel has that freedom because it has the backing of the United States and it has the regional balance of power supports the Israelis. If Iran makes a bomb, the balance of power will be shifted. So that's why both Israelis and Americans are opposed to Iran making a nuclear bomb. So the Americans wanted to tackle this. So that's why the Obama administration back in 2013 started direct negotiations with the Iranians and they reached an agreement in 2015. And as part of that agreement, Iran agreed to curtail its nuclear program, open up its nuclear facilities for the IAEA inspection. Iran promised that they would never make a bomb. In return for the United States and the West lifting sanctions on Iran. The Obama administration had signed this agreement. This is called the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. But Israelis were not happy with that. So the Americans, especially the Obama administration, they looked at it, they had a nuanced view. Their view was that regime change was beyond They are beyond the practical means, and they wanted to solve the nuclear program, stop Iran from becoming a nuclear power. And in return, they promised to lift sanctions. But the Israelis were not happy with the fact that the sanctions are being lifted. Because if you are lifting sanctions, as I told you earlier, Iran is a big country and it has one of the world's largest hydrocarbon resources. It has untapped crude oil resources, because it's been under sanctions throughout. So if you lift the sanctions, if Iran brings in investments, if Iran starts making money, if Iran starts making a stronger military, then Iran will become, even without a nuclear bomb, Iran will become a much powerful conventional force in West Asia, which would also change the balance of power. And the Israelis did not want this to happen. I remember having a conversation with an Israeli diplomat back in 2020, and I asked her the same question. I mean, don't you think that even when Israelis called the deal, the JCPOA was a very bad deal? I asked her, isn't it better to have a bad deal rather than having no deal at all? She said, no, we don't want a bad deal. We would prefer a no deal, because with a no deal we could go to war with the Iranians. This is how the Israelis always looked at it.